Without further ado, we will start with our debate on the amendments to the city charter. Let me explain how it's going to work. We'll have a 2-minute opening statement from each of our presenters. Then we will go one by one through the proposed amendments. 2 minutes each on each of the amendments. There'll be a 1-minute rebuttal after each of the presentations, and then we will have some time left over at the end for questions from the audience. And so I flipped the coin first thing this morning, and so our first presenter is going to be David Vanoss.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm David Vanoss. It's great to be here. I've been a member of this club for many years. I apologize in a moment of senior forgetfulness. I forgot to renew my dues for this year, but I just took care of that at the back of the room, and it's great to be here. Thank you all for being here. This is a really great turnout for a Saturday morning. It's an honor to be up here with my friend John. I was really excited when he got elected to the city council. I worked a polling place all day for John on runoff election day. That was one of the most exciting nights of my life, watching those votes come in. Since there's just 2 minutes for each proposition for us to address, I'm going to jump ahead and start with and say a few words about Proposition C, the third-party arbitration for firefighters in the city. And even though I'm using up some of my opening statement for it, the concept of third-party arbitration to resolve a contract negotiating dispute between a public sector labor union and a municipality that is nothing, it's nothing unusual, it's nothing out of the ordinary, it's very common in other states of the country. The states where it is very common are in the Northeast and the Midwest and the West Coast. The blue states that are in Democratic Party hands. Because in those blue states, it's part of public policy to support collective bargaining and to help collective bargaining occur. And it is common. It's a common everyday occurrence in those states that when a firefighters union or a police union or other public sector union and a municipality are unable to come to agreement and haven't come to agreement in negotiating a new contract, it's a common ordinary occurrence that they have a third-party arbitration board resolve the contract differences. The state of Texas, in adopting an arbitration procedure that's in the state law books, modeled it on the procedures in all those blue states.
Thanks, David. John?
Thank you. It's really great to see all of you out here. I wish we were only out here to go ahead and elect our candidates, but I know we're out here because of other issues that are going to be presented to us on the November ballot. I want to thank my good friend David for being here and speaking up on behalf of his views on this issue. And I know there are others in this room who may share some of those views. I'm up here speaking with you because I have a particular point of view on this issue. And my point of view comes because many of you helped elect me to the city council. You know me, you know my character, you know what I stand for. And you know that if I'm going to be on that city council, I'm going to be looking out for the best interests of the people in our community, not just my city council district, but our entire community. And in that position, I've had the insight to really look at what is going on with these particular proposals. I've done my homework. I've asked my staff to help me with that homework so I understand these issues. I've really given the sincerest consideration I can to what these three proposals mean. And I can tell you from the bottom of my heart,
30
I
seconds.
think these three proposals would be very bad for the city of San Antonio and for the citizens of San Antonio. I think we're going to have an opportunity to talk about that in greater detail. But I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk about these issues with you. And I hope when you leave, you will be better informed and can make a good decision for all of us.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start at this point with Proposition A, dealing with the number of signatures that are required to place a decision of the City Council on the ballot. We're going to start again with David. Fire away. 2 minutes.
Okay, our times are short here from here, so y'all be sure and think of your questions and ask questions. Okay, so the U.S. Constitution that was written in 1787 is a marvelous document. It's remarkable for the checks and balances of the three co-equal branches of government. But there's a bad flaw in it that's very anti-democratic, and that's the Electoral College. And you know what the proponents of the Electoral College said in those constitutional debates in 1787? They said, we can't allow mob rule. We can't let the people directly elect the president because that would be mob rule. And so we have to have a select little elite group of electors to elect the president. Now that worry, that scary alarm of mob rule, you know where that's led us? Of the last 5 presidential elections, 2 of those presidents were elected in spite of not winning the popular vote of the people. Those 2 were George W. Bush and Donald Trump. Do I need to say more? I'm very troubled. I'm very troubled by the propaganda going around but oh my gosh, Proposition A will bring mob rule, because you know what? I think that is contrary to the very essence, the fundamental premises of democracy. From the 18th century Enlightenment philosophy that led to the concept of democracy, the idea, the underlying premise is that the average person is intelligent enough to engage in self-government. By talking about how this proposition is bad because it'll allow mob rule or it'll interfere with the city council's management or the city manager's management of the government, I think that's expressing a fundamental and inappropriate mistrust toward the very essence of democracy. In democracy, you trust the people. That's why we as Americans support democracy. Thank you.
1 minute rebuttal, John.
Thank you. David, I don't disagree with much of what you said, but I think what we also need to remember about the United States Constitution is that it is a representative democracy. We formed a government that we understood is something millions of people cannot do on their own. You can't have, in this city, 1.5 million people come together to make a decision. That's why we elect representatives, and we expect them to represent our interests. And we also have the right to petition if we don't. I'm not saying we shouldn't have the right to petition. I am saying, though, that we don't want to allow ourselves to be controlled by small, narrow interest groups to create elections and turmoil within the management of a representative form of government that you have elected.
10 seconds.
That's it.
Okay. All right. Your opportunity for 2 minutes on Proposition A.
Okay.
I'm speaking to
My
you.
turn.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
My
I see.
rebuttal was
Rebuttal
2 years
and then,
now.
okay. Thank you.
We'll figure it all out. Okay, so the problems I see with A is that you are going to go ahead and create lower bars for special groups, special interest groups, to go ahead and start to disrupt the normal proceedings of city government. And that's not to say that sometimes the normal proceedings don't need to be disrupted, but you have the right to do that. Number 1, by talking with your city councilman. Number 2, by going to public hearings that are being held on all kinds of issues. Number 3, by going to City Hall and going to either public hearings or citizens to be heard and have your voice heard. This exists. But to go ahead and lower the bar in order to enable a group with special interests, such as the fire union has, to go ahead and create something particularly that are going to meet their needs is going to be very disruptive. Are we going to turn around and say, okay, there's been a rate hike for CPS. These people don't like it. So they're going to go ahead and create a petition. So what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to wait and see if they get 20,000 signatures over 6 months before we decide to enact that rate hike? Or if they get it, the elections are only held twice a year. Are we going to have to wait until the next municipal election to see if it's going to stay in effect?
30 seconds.
You know, those are the kinds of things that are going to be popping up, not just on 1 or 2 issues. There are always groups who are dissatisfied with just about everything the city council does. Do we really want to run into roadblocks by 2 or 3 small groups that may never even get the 20,000 signatures, but just the threat is enough to slow down business?
Okay. Rebuttal.
Oh, thank you. Well, in a room full of Democrats in a Democratic club, Democrats whose party platforms for years have said we support unions and we support collective bargaining. I'm very disappointed to hear the Firefighters Union referred to as a special interest. That is a talking point right out of Republican corporate America. Demonizing unions and saying collective bargaining and unions are special interests. My God, that could have come right out of the mouth of Ronald Reagan or Richard Nixon. In fact, it did come right out of their mouths, and I'm very disappointed to hear that. Your firefighters are public servants. They are there for you. They work for you. They have a right to engage in collective bargaining. I'm proud of the fact that San Antonio is one of the first cities in Texas that adopted firefighter collective bargaining. I'm proud of the fact that San Antonio provides a safe haven for collective bargaining for unions. And I think the union bashing that's going on, which I'm sorry to hear is coming from some Democrats, is very, very disappointing and very troubling. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move on. There will be time for questions later on. We're going to move on to Proposition B, and John Carriage will begin this one.
Okay, Proposition B is supposed to be a proposition that will change the way the city has management from a city manager. Proposition B wants to go ahead and reduce or limit the salary that we can pay a city manager. It wants to limit the terms that we can have a city manager employ. This is a wonderful gimmick that the union has incorporated into these 3 proposals because they realize that Cheryl Scully is not necessarily popular. And it's easy to demonize her. And all of the talk we hear about B is how much the city manager's paid and how long the city manager's been there. But this is not impacting the current city manager. This issue is not about Scully. This issue is about what city management we want to have in the future of this city. And limiting the city manager in a multi-billion-dollar enterprise like this city to $310,000 a year, and oh, by the way, in 8 years you're going to have to go look for another job, will severely hinder this city's ability to have quality leadership in the future.
Okay, rebuttal.
How many minutes?
A minute.
Okay. The city of Houston has strong mayor form of government, and under that form of government, the mayor of the city does the job that the city manager does here. The mayor of the city is the chief executive officer and the chief administrative and management official of the city of Houston. That mayor is paid $200,000 a year for doing it all, everything, including the city management work. And the mayor is term limited. Their city manager, as the mayor is term limited, can only serve 2 4-year terms, 8 years term limit. Why shouldn't the most powerful person in a city be term limited, and why shouldn't the most powerful person in the city, why should the most powerful person of the city be paid $500,000 compensation in a city that has one of the highest poverty rates in this city? Now, I'm not blaming the manager for that poverty rate, but it is out of proportion. It is grossly out of proportion to the poverty economics of this city. Thank you.
Okay, I agree that our current city manager has a very high salary. I'm not sure if it's higher than other city managers around the country. However, this is not about our current city manager. This is about future city managers. Right now, the city manager of Dallas gets $375,000. The city manager of Fort Worth gets $327,000. They're half the size of San Antonio. The city of San Marcos pays $255,000 for its city manager. They have 62,000 employees. How are we going to attract a really top-notch city manager for this city in the future at a $310,000 limit and an 8-year you're-out clause? It makes no sense for the future. It's not about now. This is about what San Antonio needs in the future.
You get your 2 minutes on B.
Which proposition?
On B.
Okay, thank you. The thing that concerns me, and I've always been concerned, over the last few years as I've watched the city manager's salary go into outer space, that concerns me a lot because this city, a city is a public body. The city is not a private corporation. The city is not in a capitalist free enterprise profit-making mode. Serving as city manager is a public service. The city manager, she or he, whoever it is a public official and a public servant. And when a city that has so many hundreds of thousands of people struggling every day to make ends meet in one of the highest poverty rates in the country, for a public servant who is paid by those taxpayers and who is supposed to be serving all those citizens, for a public servant to be making a salary that is so disproportionate, so out of reach, and so disproportionate to the economics of the vast majority of the population that she is a public servant to, I think is a problem, because I don't think that city manager can possibly relate to the life that the vast majority of citizens in this city, that the vast majority of the citizens in this city live.
Okay, we're going to move on to C, Prop C, concerning the arbitration clause for the firefighters. We're going to start with David.
Okay. I want to tell you something. This is the first time I've ever been on sort of an opposite debates with John. But I'm going to tell you, this man has been one of the best, I've considered one of the best friends in my life for a long time. And I have followed him as a role model and watched him. I've even told him he's a role model to me for independent, nonpartisan politics. He said there's no Democratic or Republican way to fix a pothole. And he's right. Now, John, in one of the things you said in your door-to-door literature is you want to help the firefighters get a contract. The way to do it is to let it go to a third-party neutral board of arbitration. Then all of these arguments and countercharges and everything will come out in the wash in objective evidence presented to the board of arbitration. Like I told you, this is really common in blue Democratic-run states all over the country. And when the state legislature adopted, I'm sorry you're shaking your hand, it is true. When the state legislature adopted, and it is true, you want to debate me on it? It's true. When the state legislature adopted an arbitration procedure for impasse disputes, they modeled it on the state laws in all these other states. And it's right in there in state law, a very ordinary and standard arbitration procedure. The only thing about it is the state legislature said it's not compulsory. So it's still left up to voluntary, and all Proposition C does is it gets rid of all the arguing and charges and countercharges and everything about the firefighters and the city's collective bargaining, puts it in the hands of a neutral board of arbitration a procedure that is time-tested in a lot of states in this country, and it puts an end to the fighting and the arguing and settles the contract dispute. Thank you.
Rebuttal.
Proposition C is really the core issue of this whole effort right now. The other things, I believe, are more like a smokescreen to get people up and excited about voting on these three issues, hoping that all three will be carried because of those hot issues. But item 3 is the core of what the fire union is looking for. And I will tell you this. I have always and still always support every union, no matter what. It doesn't always mean I support. I thought I had a 2-minute, my 2 minutes, right? 2 minutes on each.
This is rebuttal, and then
I'll
do
get
your
2
own,
minutes.
and then you can do your 2.
Okay,
And then you get the last rebuttal.
that's fine. And then I've always supported all unions. I've walked with postal workers. I've walked with CWA. I've done everything I could to support the unions in this city. I've presented union favorable things to the San Antonio City Council since I've been on there, and I will continue to do that. But I haven't always supported the leadership of every union that has been in place. And this is the problem we have. It's the union leadership that is so opposed to the city leadership that they've created this condition we're in.
Okay. All right. Now you can do your 2.
Okay? End up getting 3 all together. That's
All right.
good. So, what's the core of this issue on C? This gives the sole authority for declaring a negotiation impasse between the city and the fire union to the union. Sole authority for saying, we need arbitration. The unions refuse to come to the table in the past 2 years that I've been paying attention to this to work out a reasonable contract with the city. Several times the city has written to Chris Steele asking to resume negotiations, to hold negotiations. The city has stated it would be at the table with its negotiators in place with an offer at certain times to meet and negotiate in good faith, and invited the fire union to meet, and each time the city negotiators were there, but the union failed to come to the table. It's not unusual to have labor negotiations that are difficult and contentious. It happens all the time. Such was the case with the police union. But the city did reach a settlement with the police union. A reasonable contract is in place. Historically, when the city was able to negotiate an agreement with the police contract, that model became a reasonable guide for the fire union negotiations. But not this time. The fire union apparently is demanding a better contract than the police union agreed to, and rather than collectively bargain for their contract, they want to demand arbitration, limiting your options as a population through your city to negotiate. This is wrong for the city.
Rebuttal.
How many minutes?
You got a minute.
Okay, and then, okay,
Then we'll have questions.
okay, thank you. The first thing the city did before the bargaining even started was to sue the firefighters union to try to break their contract through a lawsuit. And the city pursued that for over 3 years. And so I think the firefighters union was highly justified in saying, no, how can we come to the bargaining table and negotiate when you're suing us to break our contract? That's like going to negotiate with somebody under coercion with a gun to your head. I would do the same thing if I had been the firefighters union. And I negotiate with people all the time in my work as a lawyer. You're trying to set up, you're making it coercive, then how can I negotiate? The negotiation in bad faith is on the part of the city in filing that lawsuit. And even though they lost summary judgment at the Texas Supreme Court, that lawsuit is still there. They can amend it if they want to and bring up new legal arguments, and they've refused to drop it.
Okay, we're up. So we are going to accept questions. John.
I assume you're representing Mr. Steele today?
I'm representing the Vote Yes campaign.
Why does the firefighters union support Republicans financially?
Well, you know, when the Democratic Party platform says we support unions as a political party, it doesn't say, oh, but that's only if the union members will vote for Democrats. It says we support unions as a principle. The Firefighters Union and their members have just as much right to engage in the political process as anybody, and they have just as much right to support whomever they choose. And I happen to think that people crossing party lines and crossing political partisanship to come together on issues is a good thing. This guy whose t-shirt I'm wearing says it's a good thing. He says people need to vote not as Democrats or as Republicans, but as Texans. John thinks it's a good thing. He said there's no Democratic or Republican way to fix a pothole, but come together on issues that you agree in. We need more transpartisanship in our political process.
Why do they support?
No follow-ups. No follow-ups, please. John, would you also like to respond to that?
You know, I have to agree with much of what David's just said. I think the problem is that the union hoodwinked the Democratic Party into endorsing their movement. And that's our fault. We should have been firmer and understood that they were supporting Republicans before we as a party at a meeting said we were going to support their initiatives. But he's right. Independently, people can vote for and support anybody they want.
Okay. Nick.
In states,
Go ahead.
in states where unions have a grievance process that ends in arbitration, there is a great deal of difference between the results, by and large, in a blue state or as opposed to a red state. Because in the red states, what is often seen is corporations, for instance, like they do in Texas with Walmart, have a list of arbitrators that they impose that are far harder to get past. And the same thing is being done with the labor unions. Now, you talked about how well the arbitration could work in a blue state. What assurances can you give us that we can avoid the pitfalls that happen in a red state?
Okay. In the statute, in Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 174, and in Proposition C, which tracks that statute, the neutral arbitrator is selected through the American Arbitration Association, which is a nationwide directory of labor arbitrators. So the neutral arbitrator is selected from the same lists of the American Arbitration Association that are used in the blue states. And labor arbitration is very different from consumer arbitration. Consumer arbitration is a stacked deck on the side of the corporation. Labor arbitration is different. It is designed to be neutral, and the procedure of selecting through the American Arbitration Association is the same neutral procedure with the same national list of arbitrators that they use in those states.
Is the choice of arbitrator in...
No follow-ups, please.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, we will.
Let me go back to something that was alluded to a little while ago, and that was that the city still has a suit against the firefighters. You know, I asked the assistant city attorney on Friday, is it true we haven't completely dropped our suit since we lost at the Supreme Court? And she said, well, yes, we haven't dropped it yet. And I said, well, why not? We lost. And she said, well, the firefighters had a countersuit against us, which is still in effect. And we don't want to drop our suit and put ourselves in a position that they'll follow through on their suit.
30 seconds.
And so we don't want to drop our suit until they drop. It's a mess. It's stupid. The point is that the firefighters do not want to bargain. They have shown no inclination to bargain collectively.
10 seconds.
They want to control the process by ensuring it goes to binding arbitration with arbitrators that aren't part of our San Antonio community.
Time. David.
I have a comment and a question. First of all, let me say that I'm extremely pro-union. I've been a union member. I was a member of the Chemical and Petroleum Workers, and I was able to complete college debt-free because of that summer union job. But The firefighters in San Antonio, while most unions, in fact, almost all unions support Democratic candidates, the firefighters have for the last many years supported Republicans, including Greg Abbott. So I resent you telling me that as a Democrat and a pro-union person, how I should vote because the union votes that way. Because you said that everybody should vote the way they wanted to. But my question is this: what's to stop me from circulating a petition? And it's relatively easy to get those 20,000 signatures, but what if I start a petition to stop the city from paying the salary of Chris Steele, who I believe is something over $100,000?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, who wants to address that first?
Well, I'll go ahead and answer. There is nothing to stop any organization, any group from initiating any kind of a threat or an action to initiate an election. And that's what this all boils down to. Do we really want to have a flood of groups that say, well, I don't like the budget and the tax rate, so I'm going to call for an election. I don't like the $10 million we've given to VIA, to help VIA. We're going to have a special election. I don't like the $17 million the city's going to spend on affordable housing. We want to have an election. I don't like the CPS or the SAWS rate increase. We want to have a special election. I don't like the city art budget. We want to have a special election. And just the idea that people are going to initiate that they're going to start the petition, and that they have 6 months to come up with enough signatures to force an election can throw so many wrenches into how city government operates
10
for
seconds.
you. That's the problem with creating these artificially low barriers.
David?
First of all, David, I'm not telling you how to vote. How you vote is your business. And I'm very disappointed in this hyper-political partisanship that people can't come together on issues they agree in common. Now, what you got to understand about Proposition A is it has nothing to do with the pure initiative and referendum part of the city charter, where people can just start with their own ideas. Proposition A only deals with the particular variety of referendum which is triggered by the passage of a city ordinance and citizens wanting to put a referendum on the ballot to challenge the city ordinance that's been passed. It has nothing to do with pure initiative and referendum where people start with their own creative idea. Now, there is something that is for charter amendment. People can create any charter amendment proposition they want, and it only takes 20,000 signatures to get a charter amendment on the ballot. Austin up the road has the 20,000 signature threshold for referendums to challenge city ordinances. It has not led to some great wild right-wing uprising of referendums in Austin.
Tony?
Yes, we have an awful lot of elections in our city, and some of them pertain to big capital expenditures by the city, all these bond issues we vote on. So we vote on the big things anyway. But my question pertains to what would happen to our bond rating. We have all these bonds out there. They passed them for good or ill, and some are still being purchased in the future by the city. And if we have the higher likelihood of overturning city ordinances and projects and so forth with a small number of signatures, will that not hurt our bond rating? And I'm not engaging in scare rhetoric because I know people who make a living evaluating urban municipal bonds, and the likelihood of instability makes the interest rates go up, and therefore we'd have to increase our taxes to cover it.
David, go ahead.
Yes, I think that is speculative. I think it is a scare tactic. Back in the 1980s, when the citizens of Austin voted to get Austin out of the South Texas nuclear project, the big campaign message from the City Hall insiders was, no, this will drive our bond rating down. It didn't. And just to go to a philosophical point, I'll be very honest with you, I would rather San Antonio be governed by its citizens than by a little cabal of bankers and accountants in a New York City skyscraper.
John?
Okay, I have here a copy of the report that was given to us by the consultant that the city was required to hire to assess what the financial impact would be on the city should these be passed. I'm just going to read the last paragraph. If these charter amendments go into effect, the city of San Antonio would be placed into an environment of policymaking and management that is uncharted. This will bring about a level of policy uncertainty during both good and bad economic times that will slow economic growth and have a large economic and fiscal impact on the
30
community.
seconds.
He's estimated that the financial impact will be anywhere from, on the low side over 20 years, $383 million, to a high side of potentially up to $4 billion in costs to the city in either lost services, more expensive financing, or
10 seconds.
non-economic development.
Okay, Bob
I'll be glad to
Salvatore.
let anyone look at it.
In another life, I negotiated contracts for the present day of FCI. And somehow or other, this thing, the firefighters and police got way off track. And what I think the public needs to know, and we're not being told because we're never told details about what goes on behind closed doors in downtown, is who authorized the city manager to challenge the evergreen clause in the city contract, in the collective bargaining agreement. Evergreen clause has been around forever. They're all over the place, in all kinds of agreements, besides just collective bargaining. But yet this city manager has some kind of authority that we don't know where she got it from to spend several $1 million in challenging this thing, and it still seems like it's going on. As John just said, it's a mess. And I think we need to be told the truth. What is really going on? Is it her desire to destroy the unions? Because that's what it does when you pull it out from under them right now. You have no more unions. And so I would like to know who gave her the authority. Was it authority of city council? Who gave her the legal labor advice? Do we have anti-union labor lawyers working in the city? Where'd it come from?
John?
Yeah, let me answer that first because I can give you some first-hand information. First of all of these discussions that we have are had in executive session. So there's certain limitations about what I can share, but I can share some very common information. I don't know who started it because it began before I got on council. But I do know that I, as a council member, and the other new council members were asked, are we willing to continue to support that court action at the time we were elected? I was very reluctant, and I met with firefighter leadership. And I decided I wanted to continue to support that legal action till it was played out. Because personally, I think that 10-year evergreen clause is bad for the city and for the fire union. They haven't had a pay raise in 4 years because of that clause, and they haven't come to a contract because of that clause. On the other hand, I don't think the city should be stuck with a 10-year agreement either. So I was opposed to it, and I said, let's play it out in court and see what
10
happens.
seconds.
Since it's done, we should be at the table negotiating this right now.
That evergreen clause that's in the firefighters' contract was negotiated and agreed to in arm's length bargaining in good faith by both the city and the firefighters union in negotiating the previous contract. It was an act of bad faith for the city to turn around and sue to try to invalidate something that it had agreed to in arm's length bargaining. Now, in private sector employment, in private industry, when a contract expires, the union has the right to strike. So that's like some balancing of the playing field that unions have, but not in public sector, and especially not in public safety. And I agree, I don't think unions should have the right to strike in public safety professions. However,
10 seconds.
without that right to strike, the only kind of protection the union has is to have an evergreen clause so that the city can't just say, no, we don't agree to a new contract, and guess what? Your contract's expired, so you don't have any rights left.
Rudy?
Hi, I'm Rudy Morales. I'm the legislative director of Firefighters Association.
Emeritus?
Yes, recently retired, 35 plus years. So I've been around a long time. I've seen a few of our contracts. City manager has signed many of them. She decided this time she wasn't going to. We're going to start playing some of these games. I have to say it's gotten to be very personal to the city manager. The reason we haven't gone to the table, if you're being sued, I'm not going to come to the table with a gun in my head. You dropped that lawsuit, which I've asked Councilman and several other councilmen to do over and over again. We're there at the table. So for this to continue saying that we refuse to come to the table, you just drop these appeals and we're there. We've said it on the news, City Hall steps. One more thing too, you know, I'm offended when you speak about union leadership. I'm union leadership. I'm sitting right here. You wouldn't let me speak up a couple of nights ago when you said it's not about the fire department, it's about union leadership. We're 1,600 plus. There's only 6 that are not in the union. The way we work is you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. You continue to vilify Chris Steele, it's not Chris Steele, there's a process. It's all members. And you're gonna see that. You're gonna see that in force coming up here really soon. As far as our union brothers, iron workers, all of them, they're with us, and you will see that too. We're labor,
Please
which has
wind
always
up.
been,
We've got time.
okay.
Is there a question?
Yeah, the question is, now that you've said over and over again, you've lost several times in court, there's still a court appeal pending. I'd like you to try to resolve that. We're not going to come back and sue whatever Liz says, your city manager. We've been through this 5 times. We want to resolve all this. I just retired, and I haven't had a raise in a long time, but that's okay. I just retired. My pension check is lots longer than it should have been, but y'all have failed to rein in this city manager.
Yeah.
So you have
Okay,
to blame.
Let me answer that. Yeah, let me answer that.
Then 2 more questions, then we have to
and-
wind it up.
I really respect you, Rudy. You know, you and I have talked. Maybe we've had some pretty serious disagreements recently. But like I said, I just talked to the city manager's office just on Friday, and I said, you know, why isn't this dropped? And they said, well, they have a countersuit, and that's a mess. I will definitely continue to suggest to the city that we drop our suit. But it isn't just the city manager. It is a majority of the council and the mayor that leads where the city goes. It's not just the city manager. When you talk about the evergreen clause being dropped, well, we're starting a new contract. So why can't you change an old contract? He said we're trying to pull something out from under a contract. This is a new contract. Everything's open to negotiation, including a 10-year evergreen clause. The police agreed on an 8-year evergreen clause. I'd be glad to see some protection built into a contract so that there's a period of time after the contract runs out that guarantees the firefighters still have an opportunity to be protected in their negotiations, but not 10 years.
David?
Yes, speaking of the police, there's a fact that everybody needs to know is that the reason the police didn't sign on to Proposition C is the police union has an impasse procedure built into their contract. They have an impasse resolution procedure. And their impasse resolution procedure is that in the event of an impasse,
30 seconds.
a fact finder is designated, and that fact finder makes fact findings about the different issues in the impasse. And if the fact finder's recommendations don't get adopted, then the issues that are in dispute, the firefighters union can put them on a referendum
10
ballot
seconds.
for the
Police
voters.
union.
The police union, thank you. So the police have an impasse procedure, and that's probably why there was inducement and instigation to reach a deal. There needs to be an outlet.
Okay, Zach.
Thanks.
David, you brought up Democrats supporting unions to show that our interests should be aligned at some point in time. So I don't think it's partisan to bring up that the union in question had a lifetime endorsement of Lamar Smith, as far as we're sitting in a club of Northeast Bexar County Democrats. You brought up that the presidential election, from a popular vote standpoint, that we've missed out because of a representative democracy type issue with the Electoral College. We've only had 45 presidents. Council could vote on 45 items in a single week, all of which would be subject to a 6-month delay if somebody decided to gather the signatures. But my question as it relates to Proposition A is the signing of a contract with the Firefighters Union would count as granting a franchise, which is a clause in Proposition A. I would argue that regardless of what side you're on, the Firefighters Union is probably pissed off at least 20,000 people at this point in the election cycle. If they sign a contract, is there any prevention whatsoever from 20,000 people alerting the city clerk that they would like that contract overturned, pushing the contract out at least 6 months until they get the signatures, and then potentially holding a public election on the firefighters' contract passage? And then at that point, what's the point of Proposition C?
Well, that's a real interesting scenario, Zach. I haven't thought about it, but I will say this. I don't think the Firefighters Union are afraid of democracy, and I don't think the Firefighters Union are afraid of letting a third-party arbitrator decide their contract disputes. But the city is. The City Hall insiders are afraid of democracy. They're making it very clear, and the City Hall insiders are afraid of letting a neutral party decide the contract dispute.
30 seconds.
If the city insiders were so confident about the reasonableness of their demand to make the firefighters pay higher costs for their health care, they shouldn't be afraid of letting a neutral arbitrator pass judgment on those demands. Under arbitration criteria that are set out in the state statute and that include the arbitrator being required to take into account the effect on the possible impact on city taxpayers.
John, do you have a comment?
No.
No.
William B. This is very, very informative. I'd like to have both of you here. I'm not sure it's appropriate to put the firefighters union to require purity tests of this union. 1,600 individuals, I suspect you're going to have some of all of the above. And that should not be a surprise. Those of us in this room probably won't agree on 100% of things 100% of the time. So this purity idea, I think, is short-sighted at best. In terms of the city manager, though, I'm not an anti-city manager person. Sheriff Scully is doing a good job, it appears to me, so far. However, I'm not sure that to have an open-ended situation so that a council can hire somebody forever is a good idea either. I think since the council rotates in and out, and to have a 15, 20, 25-year city manager running things, who's really in charge? And the question is that serving the people well when the manager, not really the council, that's really where the shots are called based on that kind of scenario, where there's not any kind of limit whatsoever. Thank you.
Yes. John, would you like to respond to that?
Okay. I appreciate what William B. just said, because he voiced his observation, and he served on some city commissions and boards. And he's observed, in his opinion, that the city manager is doing a good job. But this is part of the problem of what we're talking about right now. We're making this about the firefighters and the city manager. And these have much broader repercussions on the future of this city than the firefighters union or the city manager. That's why these are so significant. If we pass these, especially A, and it starts to change the financial stability and economics of the city of San Antonio, it will cost each of us a lot of personal money, millions and millions of dollars to this city. This isn't about the firefighters. It isn't about Cheryl Scully. It's about the future of San Antonio's leadership and financial stability.
David?
I agree it's not really about Cheryl Scully. It's about the structure of city government. The city council members are term limited. To have a city manager who is not term limited and who can serve on and on and on and on means that that city manager has more continuous knowledge and insight on city issues than the very council members. And that is what makes that city manager the most powerful person in city government, who is not, and the city manager is not elected and the city manager is not directly accountable to the citizens and the taxpayers. So the best thing we can do, I think, as presented in Proposition B, is to put democratic checks and balances on that inherent power of the city manager, who's not term limited while the city council members are, and place a term limit on that city manager, and have that city manager be paid a salary that is not so out of proportion with our low economy, with our poverty economy in this city. Thank you.
I'm sorry, that's all the time that we have because we do have other business to transact. But I want to thank David Vanoss and John Courage for having come out to speak to us about this very important topic.